Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to It's Rainmaking Time. This is Kim Greenhouse. I'm very excited today to bring you George Swanson. I don't know how many of you have had the good pleasure of hearing about him, but he is doing something so remarkable in the area of environmental consulting and design. He is bringing forth a new world housing industry based on no debt and mortgages. The essence of his work is to create living structures that cycle through the air so that what you're living in is not a cesspool for toxic materials and chemicals. He's going to talk to us about this and Breathing Walls, a biological approach to healthy building, envelope design and construction, written by George, his associate Oram Miller, and Wayne Federer. If there's anybody you should be listening to about what the housing industry needs, what buildings need, and how to do it properly, it's George Swanson. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome George Paul Swanson to It's Rainmaking Time. Good morning.
Thank you, Kim. And thank you for that great introduction because, basically all we've been doing for years and years is working in the conventional housing industry and, of course, dealing with folks with extreme chemical sensitivities that had no choice, that simply had to find alternatives to what's going on with our highly toxic building materials and finding solutions. So accidentally, in being involved with the building biology movement for years, we finally stumbled into these products that had been used in both India and China for centuries with the magnesium oxide ancient cements, the Great Wall of China, the Parthenon, all of it, pre-Portland cement that does not retain moisture and cause all these incredible indoor air pollution problems and rotting out of our buildings. So it was very, very humble beginnings, and, we just feel extreme appreciation to each of our clients who simply had no choice. We had to find alternative materials. And, of course, having the great pleasure of both studying and traveling with Buckminster Fuller for years, we found that, indeed, a lot of the technologies we're using today are not proven and have solutions that have been known for centuries that are simply ignored in a culture that bases everything on what patents you can get on it and how you can protect it from your competition and whatnot, leading us into some, extremely detrimental building materials, including 90% of what we're building with. And, of course, our clients simply couldn't be near them. And so they became, for us, our guiding light on how to approach and find what we're going to need to do for the future to not only build for that segment of the population, which is growing immensely by 30% a year, for chemically sensitive, but the very young and the very old, those most vulnerable to what's happening, in the polluted environments that they're living in. So we feel, it's really our clients who have done, all the research.
This really goes beyond the concept of sustainable environments. It really is biological buildings and environments, isn't it?
Correct. Yes. Yeah. Using the principles of, how information exchanges between all living systems and, basically asking the question, why are our buildings, dying so prematurely? In traveling the world, we've found buildings 1,100, 1,400 years old all over Europe, and in Asia, 3,000 and 4,000 years old with no mold. And obviously, it's a mineral content, the experience of multiple hundreds and even thousands of years that use the correct materials and, simply didn't create those problems. So a deep study of that, we found that all these minerals are still out there, and yet because they've been used continuously for multiple thousands of years, you can't take patents out on them, and it's been completely ignored on what we can do to create buildings that simply don't hold moisture the way ours do with using all our plastic binders and will last multiple thousands of years. so at first that seemed like just an incredible statement. How can we create a building that will last multiple thousands of years? Until I visited, and I was hired by the Chinese government that's doing the largest restoration program in world history, restoring the ancient temples and monasteries of China. And they refuse to use, Portland cement or epoxies and urethanes and all. And we're doing everything with these natural mineral blends, primarily binding with magnesium oxide. And we got involved with these 90-foot columns in the Summer Palace and had a quarter, all wooden construction, built 2,800 years ago originally, with a quarter-inch of magnesium oxide troweled on the outside of the wood and polished out to look like marble. And we chipped into it, and the wood was in perfect condition. The magnesium oxide had balanced the pH of the wood and balanced moisture content perfectly for the last near 3,000 years. So obviously, these people had thought out this process, much, much deeper than we do or have in the past. And, much we can learn from that. And, of course, I've been very encouraged in how we can create those products right here in America. In fact, they all existed up until the 40s here in America when Portland cement, took over the entire industry. But that's a whole different story of how the same people wonderful European families that created our Federal Reserve Board, created the Portland Cement Association. They could get their 1,200 patents, and even at the turn of the century, it was $1 million to create 1 pound of that stuff. Extremely unnatural bonding process that uses 5 times the amount of embodied energy to create than the natural magnesium cements. So we have been very encouraged on the long term of how to get these products, back into the mainstream.
What an honorable effort. What an honorable goal.
It's slow, Obviously, there's forces that, obviously do not want this to happen, but the laws of physics, chemistry, and biology will win out in the long term. And what's so encouraging is to see, the place on Earth where a full 68% of the world's construction went on in China has been doing this all along and has virtually banned the use of our plywood, our OSB, and our gypsum-based drywall. So those rumors about the Chinese drywall, of course, that was a German company who contracted the Chinese, who none of that ever landed in, not one sheet of that landed in China. So it's really quite false what we're being told in the media about what's going on worldwide. And in the big picture of things, it does look very, very positive that these natural materials will win out and that we really will create a very highly automated building industry based on all natural materials.
It is all about living organisms, isn't it? And it's all about living materials. Everything.
Right.
Everything. It is going to be biology and physics based, isn't it?
Yeah. And merging those two fields in a way that traditionally hasn't been done. In academia, they all create, of course, their own separate languages. But the simple way we explain it is, that it's been proven that if your heart was a pump, it'd be the size of a small house. That it's physically impossible to pump 70,000 miles of arteries and veins with these tiny heart pumps, and that it requires an electromagnetic balance between the clay in your bones and the cellulose in your tissue to create a push-pull charge that lifts blood, literally levitates blood into your ears. Now, when we clog that system up with the type of foods and everything we do, we put extreme strain on our heart. It makes the heart do what naturally will be done with a mineral balance between our blood and our blood, bone, and tissue. So what we've created is a situation, of course, massive heart failure and all that. But we use that analogy as to why our buildings are dying, because that natural plus-minus charge between clay and cellulose that lifts blood to our ears, every day is the same charge we want to create inside of a wall, straw, clay being the most obvious example, that will simply dehydrate and balance the wall out, where it won't hold moisture. We always point out that if you replace a small section of bone in your body with a plastic bone, blood won't flow next to it. Your sweat glands will close down in that area, and blood won't get to your ears. That we need these balances to create a living system that will perpetuate itself. And, of course, we're paying extreme consequence, for ignoring that in our homes. Literally, we have buildings that come apart in 25, 30 years instead of 300 or even 3,000 when these balances are completely acknowledged.
I know this is kind of a strange question, but do you think that with the shift in materials, I think you said 40 years ago, do you think that buildings have been intended to only last 20 to 30 years?
I don't think anyone intended it, even in studying, ancient cements. When, 1860, when Portland cement was invented, no one had any idea that it would, be environmentally such a disaster. The retention of water was not a measurable thing even back then. There was no ratings on materials in that type of fashion. And the long-term consequence, especially electron draining that we see, like when we set a car battery on Portland cement overnight and, have it drain dry the next morning, that was not widely acknowledged when that material came out. But the number one fault of Portland cement is simply water retention, which turns the material into completely conductive for both electromagnetics, electricity and magnetism, and heat and cold. And, of course, the moist environment creating mold and, extremely uncomfortable building. And, of course, it gets much deeper than that about what it does to the spin of the electrons in your body when you stand on it barefoot for a couple of hours. You can actually be cell dead. It's not psychological that we feel terrible, standing on Portland cement for extended periods of time. So all of that was not known science back then. But now it's quite quantified and but not talked about or, widely disseminated, in our building culture, mainly because, it does threaten such large industries. But there is an entire technology of teaching a surface how to breathe properly, how to recreate those balanced electromagnetic charges to pull moisture off of a medium in the form of vapor. So that means it can be fully waterproof but vapor permeable, like Gore-Tex. But with natural minerals, that will be functional, hundreds and hundreds of years from now instead of synthetic ways that may last, 15, 20 years and then quit breathing, like we see with a lot of the ancient or the modern Tyvek type materials. They were designed to exhale moisture but not inhale water. But 20 years later, sometimes they're not breathing properly. So, it's been a huge experiment. The experiment is actually, over 100 years old now, and but the deep consequences of it are only in the last 20 or 30, and that's where, being involved with anything in the construction industry makes you painfully aware of how these things are, creating these, degradatory situations in our buildings.
You were, in 1992, listed as Who's Who in America for your contributions to sustainable technology. And you also are a graduate of the IBS International Bau-biology and Ecology program. You're known as a building biologist.
Right.
Here's my question to you. Sometimes when materials are not available or being suppressed, there ends up being a very big cost differential between the existing standard for, let's say, construction of materials and this living, breathing material that you're describing.
Sure.
And so in the economy of it all, I get the health part and I get how different the buildings are, the way you're describing it. But what is the cost differential of using these incredible materials?
Well, yes, because we're able to, right now, of course, I'm working with several firms that, and in fact, most of my work now is consulting on building factories to make these materials here in America, and typically in just 4x8 sheets to take the place of drywall, OSB, and plywood, the main offenders, and even bringing them in from China, where over 4,000 groups are producing these now, is extremely competitive. We come in, right around $20 a sheet when purchased in full containers, quite a bit less than the price of 4x8 hardy board or comparable plywood. But the big savings, and because I'm building very affordable little 10 by 40 foot and up to 14 by 60 foot little trailers, one layer direct with these materials, including the roofing. So, in other words, all multiple layers on most construction are related to moisture issues, how to create areas that can dry behind, different planes that by themselves retain moisture and can cause mold. So we've got we call our green building program actually the green Band-Aid program, how to make the bad materials work with what are called, vapor barriers of all different sorts, but more commonly called vapor retarders, because we found, and to the great credit of the city of Austin, the first city to ban the vapor barrier, that it bleeds in the interior of the wall. There's a dew point in the wall, and it always bleeds on the wrong side and rots the wall out. So they were adding all these little microscopic breathing channels between the layers because the materials don't know how to dehydrate themselves properly. Bad magnetic charges. And, of course, that's related to the plastic binders and the methods that we have used to bind our materials. So it's really binding technologies that are at the core of, our building culture coming apart. And, why we don't want to invest in buildings that last 30 years instead of, multiple hundreds, and the incredible, financial waste and all that.
Do you envision in your lifetime what you're involved in becoming a standard?
Yes. We work really close with what's called the SIPs industry, structural insulated panels, which right now are the most automated housing going on. And currently it's using the wrong materials. It's using types of foams that retain moisture and OSB-orientated strand boards that retain moisture and require extreme careful detailing to create air films around all these adjacent materials so they don't trap moisture and rot everything out. And that industry is extremely interested in not being sued in the future. About 4 years ago, we got involved with FEMA projects in making a FEMA trailer, and we actually won the contest. 285 trailers, entered, and we ended up with 30 times cleaner air quality than the second best. And we did everything with the magnesium oxide materials, the stuccos, the joint compounds, the grout. Every Home Depot product was out. And, of course, we used the MGO sheeting and even treated the wood with the liquid MGO and clays, making the wood fireproof, mold-proof, and waterproof with all natural minerals. And, of course, we did it, extremely affordably. At the time, FEMA said they wanted to do 240,000 of these, but they had all be made in America materials. So that was a good thing. That got several investors involved with what it will take to create these products in America again. And that's the stage we're at now, is putting that financing together and building the first plants. Even bringing it in from China and from the Middle East, where it's also very popular, is quite affordable. We always point out that, the 5 largest buildings in the world are covered with magnesium oxide inside and out, ceiling and floors, every square inch. In places like Dubai, it's the only sheeting material that's been used for the last 12 years. So it's not a new phenomena at all. It's just that in the U.S., we got off to a very bad start with some materials that, are causing extreme problems that we need to make, a gigantic shift on.
How prevalent is accessing magnesium oxide for this type of purpose?
Oh, here in America, we have 16 major mines with massive reserves, and we feel they'll all come back online. There's several research groups around the U.S. and, of course, mining companies that are fully aware of this, transition that will be made, and quite anxious to get involved with it now.
It's almost like you're creating a new supply chain.
Yes, yeah, and it does disrupt a few areas of construction, but, for years I used to build, rammed earth, straw clay, and straw bale type homes, and of course those were extremely disruptive to the norm, to what we call the stick and sheeting, industry here in America, where the hope of this particular technology is that it's non-disruptive, that it uses the same common carpentry skills that are out there today. We always tell people if a carpenter's put on hardy board, they know 99% of what they need to do with this board. It's white instead of gray. We can deal with this. Right, so it's a practical way to make, a massive transition. Now, the SIPS industry, the industry that's making the prefab walls, primarily with expanded polystyrene and urethane and plywood or OSB over it, is extremely anxious to not be sued in the future. In other words, the cat is out of the bag. These materials that we're using commonly everywhere in the U.S. simply retain moisture and are rotting your building out. And the precautions that need to be taken to avoid that from happening can oftentimes be far more expensive than using materials that do breathe properly. So our entire book goes into that deeply. It's building biology for North America. What we can do in North America today to build buildings that won't have these trapped moisture problems. And of course, in Europe, these materials are very, very common. And it's, this particular Building Biology Institute that I graduated from has been giving doctorate degrees in this for 55 years in Germany. And, it's a large worldwide movement that's, virtually unknown in America, but rapidly, gaining traction.
We did an interview last year with Rudolph and Amrita, the owners of BioShield Paint.
Oh, uh-huh.
They're lovely. He's been at least for 30 years, bringing non-toxic paint and clays to the world. I spoke to Rudolph the other day, and he said it's amazing how slow it's still going. You would think
right.
because of the green industry, there would be this surge, but
right.
It's almost like there's this environmental intent and awareness, but the infrastructure and the implementation is not caught up yet.
Yes, yeah. If we're going to make it happen on a global or a large scale, that it has to be basically in a non-disruptive way, that we have to have transition technologies that allow people to still make money the first time out when they're using these new materials. The big lesson we got, especially using even what I thought was very simple products like Fazwall, clay-treated wood chip block, and Durasol, and these different AAC blocks. It's an entire building culture that doesn't do this. And who's paying these people to learn this? Now, with the entire building field, basically shut down, or two-thirds, the new building starts for homes shut down, it's the perfect time to go back to school. But, no one's being paid to go learn. So we have to have a way through it. And for us, our big breakthrough in affordability was, bringing in these 4x8 sheeting materials that solve the breathing wall issue with conventional skill sets, meaning we could make even lightweight trailers and even lighter weight than conventional because we're one layer direct on every aspect of the building, including the floors where we have a 3/4-inch magnesium board that becomes the full finished floor and structure in one layer. We simply faux finish them like gigantic tiles. And with the roofing, where we put it on and it's nothing underneath it. It's watertight. It's everything. Well, what we will do on a roof is we'll put like a graffiti guard type material, so water will race off it and not stain the pure white medium, and use raised channels over the seams, for water tightness. So extremely straightforward technology that, we've proven in, literally hundreds and hundreds of buildings now. So it's a chance, to, break the stalemate of what we're doing with today's, modern construction.
It's so exciting to be listening to you and talking with you. You're really made for what you're doing.
Oh, I have no choice.
I know what that's like.
Yeah, I was once asked in a lecture why I do this, and I said because it's so much more difficult not to do this.
Yeah.
Yeah, we just have to do this. It's so incredibly overdue. But, now the conditions are correct. And interestingly, even the first factories that we're making in both Florida and in Tacoma, Washington, are, obviously they're being financed through the Canadian companies that get all their money through the Chinese. And our finance people just ask, where have you been? We can't imagine why this industry hasn't happened in North America, except, the entrenched industries that have done everything to make it not happen. But yeah, why even, one thought is, why even bother with North America? I think 7-8% of the world's construction was made in America last year and 68% in China. So that's the good news.
What about Europe?
Europe, it's down quite a bit too. I think it's, only like 11-12% of the entire world's construction was in Europe last year. And, a massive depression of their housing and building industry as well.
Absolutely.
So it's good, at least the Asian cultures that are doing, far more advanced technologies are dominating the entire construction scene.
That's going to aggravate a lot of Americans, but I know what you mean. But, it's either like...
There was the video of the 66-day, 6-story hotel that was built in 66 days flat and renting out rooms 66 days, after starting construction.
Where was this?
This is in, it was near Guangzhou, the third largest city in China.
Wow.
So all of this is possible.
It sounds like a ninja construction team.
Yeah. It was just remarkable to see, the level of sophisticated prefabrication. And, even though they are using lots of toxic materials in China, basically because they've been providing for the West, for so long, there's all PhD level scientists at the top of the government, doing everything to reverse that trend. And luckily, of course, no sheetrock, drywall, or OSB. So, big advantages to start. And it helps at the entire top of the government. You have to have a PhD in chemistry, physics, biology, or engineering. No lawyers at the top, no MBAs, no...
Thank God.
Yeah.
Thank
no
God.
Financial manipulators allowed. And of course, it's breathtaking to be involved, especially with the eco-cities in China. And very, very little is being talked about in the American press about those eco-cities, but it is... the 12 most advanced cities in the world are under construction in China now. And it's just, wonderful. They're hiring the best Norwegian, Swiss, and German architects in the world on these completely sustainable future cities.
Wow. Have you been videoing any of this?
I haven't on the cities. The best reports going on the cities in China is from the Economist quarterly technology reports. And it's breathtaking to read about it. The scale involved with it is, very, very encouraging. A lot of it revolves around organic food, where, all the food, has to be grown organically within the city limits on the physical buildings, and transportation systems of electric boats and canals everywhere.
Very interesting.
Incredible, livable cities. Right, and they're already being built. We're completely unaware of it here in this country.
I hope somebody is capturing this, truly.
Yeah, at least you can get it. You just have to look, way beyond conventional press here in America.
How are you viewed in China? Do they love you?
Well, I love being there. I've built a home in Lausanne at the Grand Buddha, and I've even started a family in China.
Oh, my God.
So I go back and forth constantly, and it's just so encouraging that so many of the ancient concepts of Confucianism and, of course, Buddhism and Taoism, are gaining a huge renaissance in China right now.
Wow, you'd never know unless you talk to people that are going back and forth.
Yeah, and it's simply not in our press at all, even though the Chinese government, is sponsoring millions of monks, putting monks back into all the monasteries, and have the largest restoration program in world history going on, restoring the temples and the monasteries.
Oh, my God. Definitely you wouldn't hear it.
The Chinese government, yes. I know. The elderly are just, delighted to see this, renaissance going on. And so, yes, because China's growth is so rapid and almost, frighteningly rapid and, so westernized, but at the same time, the recognition of the ancient traditions and the restoration of the temples and monasteries, is adding a balancing factor to that. So it just shows incredible intelligence, in very, very high places in the government.
Is it hard for you to go back and forth because you're really between very different worlds?
Yes, and right, and so concerned about the rate of change here in America, being so incredibly slow compared to what's going on in China, where they have a very clear 5-year plan, 50-year plan, and 500-year and 100-year plan in China. They know exactly where they're going with this, and there's nothing to be afraid of. And because they will run our banks easily within 5 years. They'll own our banks outright, and they'll simply unfund hundreds of our polluting industries, which they are systematically doing right now in China. So it's incredibly encouraging, that someplace on earth gets it.
Many people have said that the Chinese government has polluted the air and the land terribly in China. This is the other side, the underbelly, right?
Right.
And
meeting the Western needs, right, for years and years, being this huge exporter of products they had little or no control of, all to American and European specifications. And now they're spitting that out in mass as they become their own, of course, largest consumer base in the world. And yes, they got through the entire 2008 period, virtually unscathed by simply, their exports to America went down, over 30% and 40% in a couple of the years. And it didn't even faze them. They are their own market now. And, and educated Chinese do not admire, and in fact, there's an incredible resentment for the types of technologies that were propagated in China and that they do not plan on perpetuating. Systematically, right now, they're kicking out all the American and European pharmaceutical companies. It's just wonderful. They're giving them 5 or 6 years to get out. Not one article appears in the Western press. Even the Europeans won't publish this.
Nobody would know. This is like a news brief from the
and
inside of China.
Out of our press is mind-boggling. When you're in China, you just can't fathom, what a media bubble we're living in. How can you keep something this large out of the press? We've been effective. The public is not, aware of these things at all.
You say on your website, the largest industry on earth is building construction, even in North America. It's double the size of the auto industry, which is the second largest industry in the USA.
Till 2 or 3 years ago, that was true.
And now what?
Now, our housing, and especially in housing, our entire construction industry has, diminished.
Crashed, right?
Yeah. And, of course, our auto industry has gone way, way up. So I probably need to change that statement. The auto industry is just slightly larger right now than the total of our construction industry because we still have healthy commercial building industry and healthy renovation industries, and reuse of buildings.
What's interesting, George, is that there are a lot of people who think and believe and feel that the environmental approach to buildings is simply a political one. And honestly, after reading your website and listening to you, I'm so excited because it has gravity. It has serious gravity.
Right at the mineral level of, rethinking, how we do every single part of our construction industry. And right, the laws of nature are going to win, and pure science is going to eclipse, all the political manipulation that's gone on with greenwashing, we might call it.
Yes.
It's very embarrassing. It has nothing to do with, housing the world properly and, getting anything that actually works over time. What will make sense, multiple hundreds of years from now. Luckily, the science is in, politically how we've kept that, even at the university level, how we've kept this out of the educational curriculum is really quite an incredible phenomenon. How educated minds can be kept away from all these fundamentals like this.
It's pretty profound because I think it ends up being more like hypnosis and brainwashing with the permission of people.
Right.
Yeah.
The paycheck still arrived, so it must be okay. But no, when the paycheck stops coming, now we have hope because people are not being rewarded for extremely detrimental behavior. And yes, the Chinese are happy not to be paid, to do these polluting materials in the future. The consequence has been so severe for China, in terms of air and water quality. And we always point out that, it was only like 6 or 8 months ago that the last of the Red Guard guys died, the 1949 revolutionaries, that were all about, China owning the market and then cleaning up later. And that meant they took on whatever they could, to raise their economic level up. And, now it's later in China. Now it's all PhD physicists, chemists, biologists, and engineers running the entire show. And they're completely intent on cleaning up. They're spending 100 times more on air and water cleanup per capita than America right now. It's really mind-boggling, the scale, and that they can afford it, is a big, big difference between what's going on there and what's going on here.
Some people are very afraid that the United States mortgages have been sold and turned over to China because the United States is in debt to China.
Uh-huh.
Is that what's...
especially on the land issues,
yes.
Right, with the new Chinese mega cities that probably will be built here, industrial cities, basically, making all the Walmart stuff here in the future. Yes, and there's, dozens of municipalities around the country, vying to get the Chinese in. And they're promising to hire,
Now, are you talking about in America?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, they will own entire cities in America in the future. There's no question about it. We have no other way to pay off our debt except land. And yes, and many are going to be shocked, but many, many more will do anything to get, the abandoned factories filled up again.
Foreign trade zones, I noticed, have been easily made available to the Chinese business owners and to Chinese companies. I noticed this looking at the list of foreign trade zones around America. I think that your observations and experience, if it's true, then we Americans can learn a great deal from the good things that the Chinese are doing and take heed.
Yes, especially in the areas of food and medicine. Where China is number one, of course, in everything related to organic food and, of course, natural medicine.
See, I never heard that. See, we
by a margin so huge. I mean, it's even in the area of biofuels, in the area of solar. China has 10 times the installed solar as Germany, which is number 2. And little things were just never told in our press.
Well, in the press, how the Chinese have been accused of providing horrible dog food and cat food and animals dying from their food and all that. So that's what we get.
The New York Times published an article that pointed out that the probability of getting a bad product out of China is 1/10 the probability of getting a bad product out of Mexico or India. 1/10. The scale is so huge that anything can be pointed out, as an example.
Sure.
But it's the safest products on Earth of any country.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Would you
It's
talk...
pure numbers.
I hear you. I hear you. When you talk about modern construction techniques also on your site, you said the average home exchanges air with the outside environment only 0.5 times every hour. And you say that this low exchange ratio results in a buildup of stale air and potential toxins in every room of the home. Then you talk about breathing walls, which allow complete air exchanges 3 times every hour. And you say that this extremely high exchange ratio allows the toxicity to dissipate right through the wall, ensuring fresh air with a minimum of potentially toxic buildup. And then you explain what's at the cornerstone of the breathing wall system is a ceiling, a wall, a floor design that combines with passive solar construction for wintertime heating and draws upon natural coolness of the earth for summertime cooling. Since these breathing walls are allowing this complete air exchanges 3 times every hour, and since we have a significant, and I couldn't even say the percentage more pollution from even the spraying of the air project that's been going on all over the world for the last 20 years to electromagnetic pollution, which is very disconcerting, including the restructuring of the grid, our light systems, and making everything wireless. What do you think about that, and how do you envision that that relates to these healthy breathing walls? But if it's exchanging 3 times an hour, is it still better for us if the pollution outside is worse? And what do you think about it?
Right. Well, to clarify one thing, that
Sure.
full 3 air exchanges per hour wouldn't be completely through the wall. That would be combining a natural air exchange, like a cool tower and other natural methods of exchanging air. The wall itself would only exchange 0.2 or 0.3 air exchanges per hour. But when you combine that with natural ventilation, operable windows, and tall cool towers, we get it up to 3 to 5. But the biggest issue is that the air that passes through a clay cellulose filter, like straw clay or clay-treated wood chip, is purified in the same way a charcoal filter, purifies a pool. So in other words, the studies they did on the Autobahn in Germany showed that straw bale buildings or straw clay buildings built, some of them are over 300 years old, have clean air breathing through them. And no one can quite explain the whole phenomena of how cellulose combined with clay, purifies everything it touches. Just like packing clay on your skin will draw out the toxins and purify your blood.
Right.
So it's an ideal medium that way. But yeah, the walls themselves, we typically cannot get up to 3 to 5. But when we combine all the natural technologies, we can do that. Now, in many cases in urban environments, we will use enviro air that is, processed through mechanical equipment to filter it, HEPA filters and whatnot, because the outdoor air is so bad. But at least we know the air that made it through a foot thick of straw clay or foot of clay-treated wood chip, is extremely high-quality air compared to the air leaking through a poorly built door or window. So the idea of the breathing wall is no air exchange through badly built doors and windows, and most of the, a percentage of the air exchange coming through the wall, and the makeup air being through, extremely well-done filters.
Very interesting.
That part can get expensive, but we often say we can take a huge part of the budget that typically goes into the mechanical system and put it into the wall, where the wall becomes a storage and distribution system as well as, keeping out rain and all that. So, spend way more on the wall system and reduce the mechanical costs, way, way down.
If the wall system can function like a filter, how eventually with filters you have to throw out your filter.
Yeah, they should clog up.
Right.
And the straw clay buildings on the Autobahn in Germany never clogged up. They process poisons like no other materials on Earth. So you're right. The filter, typically a synthetic filter, will clog and it has to be replaced. But straw clay and doesn't. Yeah, it's an incredible phenomenon. And even the stuccos can be designed with these natural mineral blends to do that same type of thing. And of course, the Germans have taken it much further with companies like Keim, mineral systems, that create paints and stuccos that teach a surface how to breathe. That means they can go in, and this is a group that, has finished the Vatican, the White House, and the Pentagon. The science is absolute. The websites are phenomenal. They actually talk about how they can teach a surface how to breathe, like an old bridge painted with all these, toxic, pore-clogging materials that they can charge with the natural minerals and pull moisture off the surface in the form of vapor for the next multiple hundreds of years.
Wow.
Yeah. They even have a brochure of a building they painted 120 years ago in perfect condition. So these guys are winning, and that's the good news.
How extraordinary.
That group was on the verge of bankruptcy for 35 years here in America because, people bought paint based on low price.
Right. You're talking about Keim?
Yeah, Keim, and the other group we're working with is Silicote, who makes a very similar blend that, again, charges the surface, basically teaching the surface how to pull moisture off itself and blow it off as vapor with no watermarks on the walls for the next multiple.
If it blows it off as vapor, are we then going to breathe it?
It's the same way your body blows off 2 quarts of water a day and you're not wet. The charge between the clay in your bones and the cellulose in your tissue creates a push-pull that pulls off 2 quarts of water a day and blows it off as vapor.
Very interesting. Very, very interesting.
Yeah. So it's the same principle that we're doing in our walls. That's why it will last and last.
I noticed something very interesting. We've been talking a lot about entrainment with different guests that we've had on the show. There's something on your site I saw. It's either on geoswan.com or it's Breathing Walls. But the question is, what is air-entrained concrete walls?
Oh, that's aerated is all. It's where they just blow air bubbles into the concrete. And that helps it out a lot, makes it dehydrate much faster, gives it higher insulative value, and creates a paramagnetic charge next to the diamagnetic clay, creating, again, this, more natural dehydration. Now, the Portland cement itself, is very, very difficult in its dense mass to dry out. So aerating it has been very, very helpful. Products like Hebel block, that go from, instead of 110 pounds a cubic foot, it goes down to 38 pounds a cubic foot. The rest of that volume being all air bubbles.
Now, Hebel block used to be available only in Europe and Asia for 65 years, and you say that it's now available in the U.S.
It has been, for the last 20-some-odd years.
20-some-odd years?
Yeah. And several companies have come from Europe and started up here. All of them have gone into bankruptcy 2 and 3 times.
Don't you think it's because everybody's ahead of their time? They're standing at the advanced point, waiting for society and consciousness to catch up.
Well, that and, they're European-based, where even 100-year mortgages, are common throughout Europe, where homes last, 300 to 700 years. So it's a different building culture. And when those German, Swiss, and Norwegian guys came over, they were shocked.
I'm sure.
And Americans replace their homes, every 35, 40 years, or, have an economic life of like 17 years where, maintenance costs, go up so high after that. It's a cultural thing, where in Europe you pass the home along, your children don't, start life off with a mortgage in the same kind of way. So, that part, I used to think would change in America because, for about 18 years I only built, with straw clay, rammed earth, Faswall, clay-treated wood chip block, or Hebel block. And those are disruptive and do add substantial cost to the overall construction of a building. And, the culture didn't change. the good thing is, I used to always joke back in the early 2000s that, we needed to take a moratorium on our building and send everybody back to school. And of course, it happened, but we didn't go back to school. So we do have basically a moratorium on building and an excellent opportunity to now really embrace some of these other technologies.
Who's buying your new book, Breathing Walls?
Well,
who's this for?
A lot of building biologist types. We're selling more in Australia than any single other country other than America. And so we're not advertising in any way. We're just servicing a market, that is already aware in that area, and what are the steps they can do now to mitigate, these issues going on with their buildings.
So is this for a contractor, or is this for architects? Could the general person buy this book and learn something totally different, or do you have to be very far along?
It goes real deep into the physics of how moisture moves through different mediums.
Yes.
And if that becomes your criteria for selection, then automatically, you don't touch, the materials that don't qualify. They don't work, basically. I mean, it's a huge admission that, we have an entire building culture that doesn't work. It simply comes apart at the seams, burns and molds and rots.
Phil Callahan wrote a lot about paramagnetic activity with regard to the soil and agriculture and well-being.
Right. And when we relate those principles to why we can consider like a solid rammed earth 2-foot thick wall, a breathing wall, that explains it. The crystals and the mineral content in the soil, is completely different than a 2-foot thick concrete wall. And it's alive. It is moving minute amounts of moisture through itself electromagnetically. And yes, they dehydrate much more rapidly than a concrete wall and are vital, alive.
Absolutely.
So he went deep into, the vitality of soils like that.
Yeah, I think he's made one of the great contributions to humanity, kind of like the Tesla of the soil agriculture and health. I don't think most of us have begun to get a feel for his contribution yet.
Yes. And we have to have, almost a complete revolution in everything in how we grow food to, bring those minerals back and to bring basically the plus minus charges, paramagnetism next to diamagnetism, bone next to tissue, creating the push-pulls that levitate blood all day up into our ears.
Can you give the audience a frame of reference for paramagnetism and diamagnetism?
Their electromagnetic charges 10 to the minus 6 smaller than regular magnetism. So in other words, these are like the rudder of the rudder. One of a newsletter that Buckminster Fuller used to put out was, and still does, is called Trim Tab. It's the 4-inch by 4-inch piece of metal on the rudder of a boat that is the rudder of the rudder. And he talks about this, how there's rudders of rudders going all the way down to this electromagnetic level, 10 to the minus 6 smaller than the electromagnetic charges. And they run the entire show on the spin of electrons. In other words, the trim tab, the 4-inch by 4-inch little piece of metal, the rudder of the rudder. And yes, that's the level we want to study, because the spin of the electrons is everything to do with, creating the basic 92 elements. It's just, tiny angle and frequency changes that create every manifestation in nature. And Buckminster Fuller was teaching us that all we need to study are these angles and frequencies to explain everything. That, they're really, everything is 99.99% empty in air. It's just spins and angles slightly changing. And of course, that's what we're disturbing now with, the electromagnetism in our homes, with our Wi-Fi and, everything going on, in our atmosphere. It's these subtle changes that can create gigantic differences between the difference of, creating an avocado or a Boeing 747. extremely small changes between those two things, on this electromagnetic level. So the trim tab is really a concept to study, that a 4-inch by 4-inch piece of metal on a gigantic, 5-foot by 20-foot rudder on an ocean liner is running the entire show. It's the rudder of the rudder. And now then you study the electron spins inside the metal of the little 4x4 piece of metal, and you understand that it's running the little 4-inch by 4-inch piece of metal. So obviously, we have a saying in building biology that, when we deal with people with chemical sensitivities, that 100% of the people with chemical sensitivities have electromagnetic sensitivities. That if you handle something on the chemical level, it's too late. It has to be handled on the electromagnetic level. So cleaning up the environment on these levels is extremely important. And studying, ancient mineral sciences gives us a clue of how we can create sustainability, on this spin of the electron level.
Since most of us, I would say, that are paying attention to the changes structurally with the grid, with Wi-Fi, with microwave stations, the grid is being redone and is being turned into a wireless grid. Are you aware of that?
Yes, on a massive scale. And to the great credit of this Building Biology Institute, it's become kind of the, one of the great vanguards of how and why we shouldn't be using Wi-Fi at all. And going deep into the science of, what's happening, on the spin of the electron level with this new technology permeating the air everywhere. Studies out of Europe, really confirm it. In England, they've removed all Wi-Fi within a mile and a half of every grade school, just from massive complaints of headaches and kids, the neurons in your brain, for young people are not formed yet. And these subtle energy shifts, are being shown not to be beneficial.
The thing that's so concerning to me is that it's being done at such a large and high volume scale in terms of the intensity of what's being done, not just the large scale, but the intensity, the dramatic shift from a grid that's not wireless to being turned into wireless. This doesn't even include the microwave stations. We're just talking about everything else. With respect to building biology and working with mineralized alive buildings and this magnesium oxide, for example, and the other materials you work with, how do we defend ourselves?
And that's really interesting because we've been working with a former NASA scientist, Dr. Jim Beal, who was in charge of, protecting the astronauts in the first space capsules from EMFs. And he's our number one advocate, He's taken our, quarter-inch 4x sheet of our MGO board, tilts it against a window that's facing a cell tower, and is measuring a full 98% blockage. So there's no other material commonly available and affordable, that can block quite like that.
Wow.
So we build with the thicker materials on both sides of a wall and then treat all the wood with the magnesium oxide. We can easily get 95, to 98%, blockage, except at the windows and doors. In fact, cell phones don't work inside these buildings. You have to take your cell phone, directly over to a window. So there's hope on this level.
That's great.
Yeah. We're working with a couple of groups in Colorado Springs that have gotten gigantic grants from the U.S. military, studying all this EMP or the shielding, from the sun spots. And they're doing a good amount of work with the magnesium oxide as well. And of course, we're copper coating some of our panels, mainly for aesthetic appeal, but that even furthers the numbers and types of shielding that the board will provide.
Very interesting. Wow.
Yeah, so yes, the minerals can do it all. I mean, we all know that can work on the level of, our foods and our medicines, but it's wonderful when, the actual material surrounding you is also emanating those, health-giving fields.
That's so exciting. What do you think?
Yeah, the earth and all that. One of our favorite books is called The Lechtenbau, published over 900 years ago in Germany. And it simply means sticky mud. What the ancient European cultures did to create these muds that combined with straw and wood chips, would bind and stay together, hundreds of years later. And sure enough, they had a whole chapter on how to mix magnesium oxide with cow blood, cow urine, and cow dung, to create these incredible sticky muds that, were balancing the pH of the timber frames they packed it next to without shrinkage and did everything correctly and balanced the moisture content of the wood, again, for multiple hundreds and even up to thousands of years.
What do you think we should be doing with air conditioning?
Not using it at all. Yeah, it's just, it heats and cools your tissue and not your bone mass. It's a short wave. Our modern AC should be considered medically criminal because, if you're 4 degrees off between your bone temperature and your tissue, you go into hypothermia. It's absolutely harmful, what we do with our modern heating and cooling. What we've done is we've created a building type, because it can't dehydrate properly, where we can't use natural radiant heat and radiant cool in the same ways we did in the past. When we had regular good old, lath and plaster, you could have steam heat in your building. They all knew you had to have gap between the lath and a big ball of plaster between that created the thermal mass that could dehydrate properly using steam heat. Steam heat, hot water, sun, and fire are the only natural heat. They create a long wave that goes straight through your tissue into your bone mass and heats from your bones out. Your bones have 3.5 hours of thermal storage, and your tissue has 10 minutes. Which one should we be heating and cooling? In other words, we're constantly turning up our heating and cooling because we're only heating and cooling our tissue. That eventually will heat your bone mass, but it's extremely slow, inefficient process and extremely hard on your body to constantly have a different temperature between your bone and your tissue. And you burn hundreds of calories per minute, and not the good kind of calories where you lose weight, balancing the temperature between your bone and your tissue. And if you don't keep it balanced, if you're 4 degrees off for 20 minutes, you go into complete brain fog. Every resource in your body has to get those two balanced again, or blood won't levitate to your ears. The viscosity will change. Everything is dependent on that balancing in the temperature through your bone mass temperature. And historically, that's all we ever had was sun, fire, hot water to heat. And cool is only cold water. And we can introduce cold water cooling into our modern thermal mass building or into the traditional systems without the walls rotting out. You can't, one of the common systems used in Europe is to take ice cold water in a crown mold with a 1-inch gap behind the crown mold and put a cold air film created by the cold water against the thermal mass wall that isolated thermal mass to the inside of the wall and outsulated, with cellulose. We don't have that anymore. Our modern buildings are only kept up with the AC. We have to force the inside of the cavity to dry with our stupid AC and heating systems. And it has nothing to do with how human physiology works. We're totally shortchanged in these modern buildings. In fact, that alone justifies the breathing wall, is that we can now use natural heating and cooling in the building again, like the old lath and plaster. And, none of that works with drywall, plywood, and hardy board and materials that, are holding moisture in.
So we wouldn't necessarily need swamp coolers either?
We could reintroduce swamp coolers, and we have, into like our Faswall and rammed earth buildings, because the walls can deal with the moisture. They can take on massive amounts of moisture, like a swamp cooler, just, pouring cold air over a bunch of felt and blowing air through it, and then dehydrate itself, blowing that moisture off as vapor hours and hours later with no water buildup on the walls or in the air.
So we don't really need air conditioning.
No, not with a properly designed building. Right. In fact, we have 4 buildings here in Austin that have no central AC. But, we have massive eaves, cold water misting on the roof, cool towers, and, minimum 1 foot thick thermal mass walls, with the thermal mass isolated to the inside.
What's a cool tower?
Just a good old-fashioned central atrium with typically 3 foot by 3 or 4 by 4 tower that goes a few feet above the top of the roof with vents in it, typically with a Venturi fan or a solar fan on top to assist pulling, hot air out during the hot afternoon, and with vents opened at the night to let cold air drop, like a lead balloon down the tower and suck into the walls. Works incredibly well in our climate, here in Austin. In Taos, it works even better. In some climates, you have to modify it and have highly, highly insulated louvers, up on top of the tower and not let the cold air in, of course, during the winter. But, just saturate your interior walls with, nighttime cool air. And even with 4 inches of thermal mass on the inside of your walls, it will take 3-4 hours for that to bleed out during the daytime.
What do you do about floors and carpets? I have a feeling...
No carpet, of course.
No carpet.
Yeah, and, of course, ceramic floors or ideally rammed earth, sealed floors. Some of that is expensive and difficult. The most efficient thing we've done for the breathing floors, and our book goes very deep into how to replace underneath a conventional slab, putting down clay-treated wood chip, dry chips, and then instead of a vapor barrier, putting a breathing filter cloth, and then pouring a conventional slab, and then capping the slab with a 1/4 inch of MGO backer board, real similar to Hardy backer. But then you've created full breathing underneath the slab and a medium on top that can exchange moisture. So you can even, teach a slab how to breathe. And, of course, that's because the cost of the MGO cements, are 12 times higher than Portland cement in North America. So we're still stuck in the large, massive areas of the building, using Portland cement. But even Portland cement can behave properly, especially used in things like the Faswall block that creates a breathing jacket around the cores of the concrete that are isolated towards the inside of the wall that dehydrate properly when they have a jacket of clay-treated wood chip around them that, blows the moisture off as vapor.
Where are you at about refrigerators?
Well, the modern refrigerators are really, really bad, of course. But there are some really good ones. There's that Sunfrost,
Funfrost?
Yeah, it uses 1/10 the energy. So, but those are rare and, expensive at this time. So ideally we'd go back to ice blocks, but built into the walls that, are a foot thick with the isolated thermal mass. And of course, even ice cooling for the building where you create like a large ice cube, in a separate building or built into the wall that you refreeze at night and then use as it melts during the day, run that into the troughs along the top of the ceiling and get this wonderful, cool, we call it. And here in Austin, we can explain it real easily how you can cool by that method. We have these beautiful springs in downtown Austin that have cold water on a big mass of rocks flowing all summer. And on a 110-degree day, you can stand 40 feet away from that wall for 40 minutes. You'll extract all the heat out of your bones and walk away from that wall and feel like you're in heaven for 3.5 hours
Oh my
while
God.
while your bones radiate cool from your core, out to your tissue. And yes, that's exactly what we want to create in the walls of these buildings.
This is so exciting. I have to tell you, I'm ready to build something.
It actually works, and that's a great thing. Nothing to do with theories. It actually has worked for multiple thousands of years. Our big challenge is how to create that in a modern, building environment where everything's based on, building extremely rapidly and low cost. And, we're making progress. Obviously, the little trailers and modular homes we're making, do not have, a deep amount of thermal mass on their insides, but at least they dehydrate several times faster and are effectively, much, much more insulated. The R-value ratings they use on modern buildings, are done under perfect control, low humidity conditions. And at 30% humidity, the R value of a fiberglass, cuts in half. And at 90% humidity, it all turns into a conductor, not an insulator. So we're, pumping up our AC all day long to dehydrate the moisture in our walls. A terrible way to hold up a building. And extremely hard on your health, to constantly have your tissue temperature changing while you're turning off and on this AC all day.
I think most of us feel hopelessly stuck. We're in artificial lighting.
That's right. We're all stuck in these, 1970s buildings that don't work. But yeah, just the health issues alone more than justify, the higher cost of a thermal mass wall. But in between, we're still going to have to build, a lot of buildings with sticks and sheathings. Simply, an entire building culture, that worked around that. Luckily, we're the only one on Earth. The rest of the world does build with thermal mass and has for centuries, places that ran out of wood a lot sooner than we did. So that's the good news. There are very few stick buildings being built in China. And of course, those that are being built, are being at least built with, fully breathing materials.
You've traveled a lot. What are some of your favorite places on Earth besides China?
Parts of Germany, are still really, steeped in tradition, and the respect I have, for the building science or the, bau-biology institutes, that started in Germany over 55 years ago. Basically, putting high-level science around common sense. Now, Germany has moved away from a lot of that, into extremely high-tech solutions, for building homes, because typically they build a common home in Berlin, would cost the equivalent of about $500 a square foot to build. So yes, they've played around with some extremely exotic ways of building, but it always comes back to these, basic, natural building technologies, and then simply putting high-level science under all that common sense, to make it more palatable, to the rest of the world. So that's been a really, really fun place to be, where at least that impulse to do that and to put that into the educational system has been, in Germany for many, many years.
They seem to be at the forefront of a lot of great works. Yes.
There's great hope in that. That they're doing it in this legalistic kind of way is kind of sad, we visited a lot of these, multi-million-dollar, bau-biology buildings in Germany, and, they even regulate what doorknobs you can put on your house. You can be put in prison for hiring your own plumber on your house. Everybody's got to be union.
Are you serious?
Oh, yeah. The guy cleaning up your yard is making the equivalent of $38 an hour. And yes, you're on a 10-year waiting list to have a home built. And yes, young people don't get new homes in Germany. So they hire, top-level building biologists in the government. You have to be licensed as both a doctor and an architect, to practice building biology in Germany, for the government. So extremely well educated, but effectively, too many laws, too many.
Overregulation.
Yeah, we're trying to do it from the bottom up, in America. And of course, it's been very slow and not happening. In Germany, it's simply illegal to build the wrong home in the wrong climate. And, only good things can get built. It means far fewer buildings get built. And of course, young people don't even have a chance. But now that's happened in America, even with our bad building culture. So there's a lot to be learned, on building buildings that, will last multiple hundreds of years and, have solid principles around their construction.
Have you been to Egypt?
No, I haven't. The whole Middle East, is very, very intriguing, a real hotbed, but still, I think its recovery will be based a lot of it on, these natural sciences. That, there's a huge movement throughout the Middle East, to reject a lot of Western values and to look at, the deep common sense of multiple centuries of experience.
What are some of the other countries you've been to that are very receptive to building biology?
Oh, gosh. Venezuela and Bolivia. I spent a month in Bolivia where they're building a large magnesium oxide factory. Brazil is really good now. All those countries, are basically ascending, in a really wonderful kind of way, and seriously critical of what's happened in America, and not so much trying to emulate us. That's what I'd say is the biggest trend difference in the last 10, 15 years. Is there used to be this almost worship for American decadence, our bad foods and our drugs and all that, and very little admiration for that worldwide right now. So there's great hope, that they'll spit us out.
You definitely don't sound like a patriot, if you know what I'm saying.
Oh, in one way, no. I see what I'm doing as totally patriotic.
Oh, good.
In other words, natural capitalism would have allowed all of this to happen long ago, would have kicked out our pharmaceutical companies based on pure what works.
Right.
Natural capitalism is about the best coming to the top. And, of course, we have nothing like a capitalism in America at all.
That's true.
Not even close.
That's true.
We're subsidizing, the worst technologies on earth. So, to me, what this is has nothing to do with, American capitalism whatsoever. In fact, the joke is they're far more American in China right now than we are. Almost unbridled capitalism, but they did figure out how to put a cap on it called no land ownership.
Mm-hmm. Unlike here, where anything goes.
Yeah. You put a cap on it, and you can make all the millions you want, but they only have 106 billionaires in all of China, and until a couple years ago, the richest guy had under $3 billion. Now there is one guy with 11 billion, and the next guy down is 5 billion. Nobody's rich enough to buy the government. And it could have a lot to do with how they can get top-level scientists into the top of the government.
That's interesting.
Yeah. Financial manipulators are considered low-level work in China. Bankers and all that have far, far lower status and are not allowed in government work.
You know what, though? I totally can understand that.
No lawyers. Absolutely.
No lawyers.
4,000 to 1.
Throw the lawyers out.
Fewer lawyers per capita in America. 4,000 to 1. And they're doing fine without it.
Although the Chinese are deep and steeped in metals, gold, silver, platinum, big.
Because they plan on having a currency that can be backed in the future. Right. And yes, they have since 2008. They've been privately demanding an audit of our Federal Reserve Board. And yes, they'll eventually get it, and everyone knows that's absolutely the end of our financial system. They are completely aware of all the manipulations that have gone on, and they have not been the beneficiary of the Eastern cabal, whatever you want to call it,
right?
Or the European bankers. And yes, they will eclipse it completely. And they're just about to do it now.
As we get to the end of this first interview with you, talk a little bit about, is it geodesic domes?
Oh, yeah, that we did for years and years.
Yes.
And
What are they? Explain it to the
well,
public.
they have a long ways to go. Right now, of course, they're just it's based on spherical trigonometry and using the 6 vectors of a tetrahedron to coordinate space instead of x, y, and z. And with Fuller's synergetic mathematics, he was able to define all the triangles that can create a sphere with whole numbers. And it was, quite a breakthrough, to get a mathematics that can handle, all these incredible, odd, what appear to be odd angles, and basically define a sphere, with whole numbers and make it something engineers can deal with. So it held extreme potential, but for years we built what I call wooden spaceships. All the right shapes with the geodesics and all the efficiencies, but all the wrong materials and processes. And Fuller's life goal was to create a building industry, based around the geodesic dome and high technology that would handle all of this, in extremely sophisticated kind of ways. And he built beautiful prototypes that traveled all over the world. And of course, none of them really obtained mass production. That was his life's goal, to free people up from mortgages and have air deliverable buildings that, would literally cost 1/10 of what a site-built building would cost. And, his extremely humanitarian goal, is to get this to happen in mass scale. He achieved some success for a little while right after World War II. I think about 1,500 of his Dymaxion homes were made and traveled all over the world, and to inspire the GIs coming back from the war, into automated housing and to take all those factories that had been making the war machine, and turn them into housing machines. And anyway, a lot has been written on why that never succeeded, the nature of how we finance homes and all that, the unstable mortgage markets, on and on, that really do not finance, building one home properly. Even in 1948, he calculated that it'd be about $6 billion of 1948 dollars to tool to build one house properly. And then, of course, create millions of homes at 1/10 the cost. And of course, no one's invested like that. Now it would be, over $100 billion.
You mean to establish the blueprint for it, the production level manufacturing?
Yeah. He had it all outlined. Of course, a lot of the technologies that to do it didn't even exist, but he even outlined what research and development programs would have to go on, to create, every one of the aspects for his, self-cleaning homes that grew their own food, collected water, did all of that. And, now a lot of the technology is actually here, but, the will to finance to do that properly is not, coordinated at this time. We do feel it can happen incrementally, though, and even this little SIPS industry that just prefabs, the exterior envelope and interior walls of a house is at least in the direction. And because that industry is thriving right now, it's one of the only areas of construction that are thriving in America right now, it's showing great promise. And many of those factories are owned by people with, much higher education levels than in the past, and they definitely see an industry that could grow with these, natural materials.
I think you have to have multifaceted levels of commitment from different supply chains in this to make the thing go into a standard in terms of the way it operates. And so if you don't have really full commitments, like many players have to get together and saying, that's it, we're doing it, we're bringing it in, it doesn't matter, we're creating it. And when you get a certain amount, maybe those players will be the trim tab that sets this into a new standard.
Yeah, the critical mass.
Yes.
And that's coming very, very close now. Having the whole housing industry basically evaporate, it really, really got people, thinking much more clearly. People do not want to see the same housing industry reintroduced. And a lot of young people have no desire for, the 7-bedroom home of their parents, nor any practical way of ever seeing that happen again. So people get it this time. This isn't just a little temporary bloop.
I think this transition, though so many people are suffering, there's a lot of suffering and fear and anxiety, and a lot of jobs have disappeared. The vacuum, though, is ripe for new industrial expressions, new biological expressions, new processes and protocols, and this consciousness to have its way in new types of financing, new structures, and a whole systems approach to living, period.
Probably never been a time in our recent history, when it's been, better conditions for change. Yeah, all the temporary, what to do during the transition, when so many apparent things seem to be coming apart. And government could play a much, much more active role. And they may, it may turn out, the most advanced homes in the world are made by FEMA. And that's largely because of, the massive lawsuits and the incredible trauma, of having to abandon 120,000 trailers and put people, into 5-star hotels and, have, over 3,000 kids that have permanent respiratory and immune system damage that will have to be paid for by, the federal government. So yes, at least economically, it's being quantified, the high cost of not evolving industries or of protecting, polluting industries. But yes, there needs to be a way that, people can get onto the new technologies without, disrupting their lifestyles. And we just have to show that it's going to be more profitable, to be involved with these technologies, even in the short term. And that's why what I feel the types of things we're doing now just seem ridiculous, like a Band-Aid on a cancer victim. But they're in the direction of putting the foundation down for something that can actually thrive in the future. So there's more hope now than there's ever been.
How well did you know Bucky Fuller?
Not real well. I just traveled. I graduated in 1975 from Western Washington University, and there were no jobs at the time. And I was lucky enough to know how to live with no money, and just was a hanger-on. I just traveled around wherever his lectures were and got very inspired on the geodesic dome, moved back to the Seattle area after a couple of years of traveling around his lectures, and, started a dome company with friends, and we ended up building like 300 domes in the Seattle area, and, really, really got familiar with, what was not working about the construction field. Even adapting conventional construction to geodesic domes, that was in the early 80s, and, we were building them extremely tight. Those were in the days when it was all about energy efficiency with, zero consideration to materials, and people were getting sick in our domes. And it was just becoming crystal clear that these polluting materials only work when you build in a sloppy way to allow massive air exchange through doors and windows and poorly built construction. So the irony is that your probability of being poisoned in a building, goes up as you spend more and more money on it and tighten up the envelope. And it was just, many, many years of doing those that made it crystal clear that what Buckminster was talking about, all new materials and processes based on the physiology or biocompatibility with humans, had to take place with a deep study of human physiology and the built environment.
Extraordinary. I'm so excited.
Even Buckminster Fuller's first bankruptcy was his stockade building system in Chicago, which was MGO bonded straw bales. And he did that in 1927 and even put his father-in-law into bankruptcy on that one. He had 4 bankruptcies in his lifetime, but died, multimillionaire with, I believe, 48 honorary doctorate degrees, more than any man in world history.
Wow. Did you read any of his books?
All of them. Yes, over and over.
Any particular one or two that was more
ideas and integrities are really good, about his, philosophy, and then, of course, Synergetics 1 and 2 about his mathematics. Basically replacing the tetrahedron, the six axis of a tetrahedron, with the XYZ system. So his goal was to eliminate, pi and e and Avogadro's number, and he described the behaviors of wavy and circular things in nature with whole numbers. He couldn't stand the number pi. One of the times he was kicked out of Harvard twice. Never had a degree in his life. And one time one of his professors was writing the number pi up on the blackboard. It was on the seventh blackboard, because, of course, you can never resolve. He pops up in class one day and says, "Nature can't be irrational, only your understanding of it."
That's great.
And they kicked him out of school for it. He invented a new mathematics and proved that all conventional math was a subset of his own. And then later, I got involved with meditation because he was, very enamored by Maharishi Mahesh Yogi and did beautiful talks together with him, and talked about how in the ancient Vedas they had a math very, very similar to what Buckminster Fuller was advocating, a holistic math that could describe all the spins and wavy things in nature with whole numbers. So his goal is that you could teach nuclear physics to a first grader without the stupid calculus, trying to stair-step nature and these, averages, trying to figure out, waves and all that with, this irrational number system that would never work.
Absolutely fascinating.
Yeah, so extreme hope in that, that when those technologies are in the industrial equation, what looks like this incredibly complex process, of making a full living, functional, building, will become much more straightforward.
Okay, let's suppose you have unlimited capital, and you're just told right now there's unlimited capital. You can do anything you want. What do you want done?
Well, actually, exactly what we are doing, just creating all the factories here in America to first replace our board and, our stick construction building culture. So in other words, a transition where people with the same skill sets they have now, can move right into a fully non-toxic breathing buildings and create the groundwork for all the other technologies to grow. The fully automated, building structures of the future.
It's a great pleasure to have you on the show. Thank you so much for being with us.
And thank you for the opportunity.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have been talking with, learning from, and listening to George Swanson. You can reach him by going to geoswan, geoswan.com. You can also go to breathingwalls.com. Thanks again for being with us.